Mr. President, I rise to speak on the urgent supplemental bill, and I rise as the chair of the full committee on appropriations that is actually trying to move the urgent supplemental. Supplemental is an important word. It means it's in addition to fiscal years 2014 funding. There are elements that we make request for an urgent supplemental because of unexpected emergencies, either within our own country or affecting a treasured ally like the state of Israel, or really the crisis at our border because of what's going on in Central America. Remember, it's the crisis in Central America that is creating the humanitarian surge at our border. I rise now, though, to speak about one element. I've spoken about the fires in our western states. Later on today, I will speak about the children and actually try to paint a picture for people on what's going on in Honduras, El Salvador, and other countries that are also affected. But right now, I want to speak also about Israel. Mr. President, Israel is under attack, and it's under attack by a terrorist group that denies its very right to exist. And it's under attack by an organization called Hamas that is sending thousands of rockets toward Israelis' cities and towns, targeting innocent civilians. Its very survivability is being defended by missile defense technology. The most crucial for short-range missiles is a technology called Iron Dome. This missile defense technology has saved hundreds of lives. I can speak to this when I say personally, not because I'm in Israel and see the horrific attacks, but I have a classmate from college, a very dear friend. We've stayed in contact over a number of years. She is a psychiatric nurse. When she married, they made Aliyah and moved to Israel, where she is taught at Hebrew University. Her husband, a distinguished psychiatrist. They live in a town called Ashkelon. And on Sunday, she sent me the most poignant of emails. I won't read it to my colleagues, but suffice to say, she wanted to tell us what's going on. Every day, there are these rockets going off. They spend their life going to shelters. They can only move in a small patch around because they have to be under really safety rules within 2 or 3 minutes from a shelter. She said in her email to me that it is literally Iron Dome that is saving their lives. Well, Mr. President, Iron Dome is a technology that needs to be replenished. It needs to be replenished, and the state of Israel has discussed this with their government, and Secretary Chuck Hagel wrote to our committee asking that this be in the supplemental because essentially this war or terrorist attack against Israel. The committee has responded by placing $225 million in there in order to replenish this. Now, there are many who say, well, I don't know if I want to vote for this. What is Iron Dome? And is this an attack technology? Let me say what Iron Dome is. Iron Dome is a high-tech defensive system. It's not an offensive system. It's used as a missile defense system. How does it work? Approximately 10 feet long missiles intercept rockets. Their rockets aren't designed to shoot out. They're designed to shoot rockets shooting at rockets that are being fired on Israel from a range of between 2.5 and 43 miles. Each interceptor missile, remember, it intercepts another rocket, costs about $50,000. Stunning, isn't it? Israel has invested over $1 billion of its own money in Iron Dome. Our government has worked with them to develop Iron Dome so they can maintain their qualitative edge. But just think, in order to protect themselves, every rocket going off cost $50,000. As of July 30th, over 2,730 rocket launches have been directed at Israel itself. Iron Dome has sent over 515 interceptions. 9 batteries have been deployed. More than 4,100 targets were attacked since the beginning of the operation. But remember, 2,700 rockets have been directed at Israel. Iron Dome has deployed 515 at the cost of $50,000 apiece. Now what they're saying is, help us replenish our interceptor rockets because we're using them up. Essentially, it's bullets not directed at people, it's rockets in the air. Israel knows that it has a 90% success rate in intercepting these rockets coming from the Gaza. What they're asking for help from us is the ability to replenish these rockets. I hope that we do this in order for them to continue to be able to defend themselves. It's absolutely crucial that Israel has the opportunity to defend itself while others are working on ceasefires or political solutions. Those are excellent diplomatic and humanitarian goals, but right now we have to make sure that Israel can defend itself. This is important because Israel is a treasured ally. It's important that we enable them to guard themselves against a terrorist organization. We all know that the long-range solution is that the Hamas infrastructure must be eliminated. That's absolutely so. These so-called, well, they're not so-called, as a member of the Intelligence Committee, I've had many briefings on this. I can't go in detail, but there are tunnels that go right through Gaza and into the edge, or actually, in some instances, into Israel itself. During this conflict, Israel has discovered 31 tunnels, extremely disturbing. They can show, and they're big. These aren't like, when you think of a tunnel, this isn't like a little pipe, for water. This is a tunnel where as many as 2 people could cross themselves side by side going through, and in some instances, actually weapons being able to be carried through. These tunnels are the very threat to Israel's existence, and in addition to the tunnels, the rockets that are pummeling Israel continue to be fired every single day. We believe that for our allies, the right to self-defense. We have signed memorandums of agreement to enable them with their missile defense system and to maintain their qualitative edge. Now, when they are in a very struggle for its safety and perhaps its future, we need to be able to pass this important legislation. We also know that when we pass this legislation, Iron Dome shouldn't stand alone. And many people who support the Iron Dome legislation, like I, want to also support those people who are also under threat. And Mr. President, that takes me to the children. Because right now, the children in Central America are under threat. And what are they under threat? Well, I'll talk more about that around 5 o'clock. But what are they under threat? Well, they're under threat because of the narco drug dealers that have created the most vicious, violent gangs that then have now almost taken over some of these Central American countries. They want to be able to recruit the young men to be part of the gang, part of the drug trade, part of the couriers, part of what is involved in doing a drug trade. And Then when they refuse, they either threaten them with death or the most grisly and ghoulish of torture. There are reported incidents, not in our classified briefing, in public media of children and being tortured to death because they refused to join a gang. They literally were fighting for their lives. Now, these children that are coming to our border are fighting for their lives, and the way they fight for their life is to flee. They are fleeing the violence. Now, I know people are dismissive of some of this, and they say, oh, there you go. You're a soft-hearted social worker. You're a liberal. You love children. The answer is yes. Yes to all that. Yes, you betcha. I claim it. I own it. That's who I am. But I don't do that because of some gushy-poo feeling here. I'm doing this because of the actual documented violence in these countries. And I believe we need to respond to the needs of the children, let them tell their case, not only to a social worker, which is a good step in my mind, but also to an immigration judge, and using the law of our country, the legal criteria for asylum and refugee status. Let's listen to the stories of the children. And if those children qualify for asylum or refugee status, then they should remain in this country. If they don't, there are other avenues for them to return home. But for gosh sakes, could we stop punishing the children for the crimes of the drug dealers and the human traffickers? Don't punish the children. There are those who want to further militarize our border by calling out the National Guard. Well, what are they going to do when the children present themselves with little slips of paper saying what their name and their hometown is and where their aunt is living in Langley Park, Maryland? That's not the job of the National Guard. And if you want to use guns at the border, yes, don't use them about the children. Use them about the drug dealers. And by the way, it is our insatiable, vociferous desire, appetite for drugs that has fueled this whole economy in these countries. So, Mr. President, I'm going to say more about this, but I do want to say that what is in this supplemental is the tools for people to defend themselves. For our friends in the western states, this is money to protect themselves against firefighters. And gosh knows, local communities need that help. It's for a great nation like Israel, our treasured ally, to continue to have the interceptor rockets to be able to defend itself, and defend itself it should. And it's also money here that we take a look at the border, we honor our law in terms of determining refugee status for those fleeing from violence in a home country, and then we go after what is creating the violence, which is right there in Central America against the narco-traffickers. Because remember, Mr. President, because you're very knowledgeable in this, if you're willing to trade in drugs, you're also willing to view everything like a commodity. So they view drugs as a commodity, and they view women and children, girls and boys, as a commodity. And they then move into human trafficking and the most vile, repugnant sexual trafficking. We need to get some of our darker appetites under control, and we need to be able to fight. If you want to fight with guns, join with Central America and fight against the narco-traffickers. Mr. President, I hope this clarifies the intellectual underpinnings of this bill, the compelling financial necessity, and the humanitarian issues that are facing people in our own country, at our own border, and with the treasured ally. Mr. President, I yield the floor.